Japan, the land of the rising sun, a nation renowned for its technologically advanced cities, traditional cultural offerings, and immense natural wonders, which together make for one of the most sought-after tourist destinations in the world, attracting millions of visitors each year. Surprisingly, however, this level of openness to outsiders is a relatively recent phenomenon in the nation's epic history. In fact, for well over 200 years, from the 17th to 19th centuries, Japan's borders were firmly closed to any outside visitors whatsoever. This time period, known as Sakoku, bore witness to a flourishing of Japanese culture, rapid economic growth, and dynamic societal developments, which up until that point had never been seen before. As a result, this gifted the nation with many of the iconic cultural treasures whose legacies have survived to this day. But how did this island nation undergo such a dramatic transition from a period of relative isolation into becoming one of the most developed and open countries in the world today? This is the epic history of Japan. The archipelago of islands that make up the modern nation of Japan have been inhabited for the best part of 40,000 years, with the first human settlers migrating there from mainland Asia. These early inhabitants brought skills such as agriculture and metalworking with them, which laid the groundwork for the establishment of permanent settlements and eventually the earliest kingdoms. By the 3rd century AD, a significant portion of southern Japan had coalesced into a centralized power structure based around the Yamato region, which was ruled under a system headed by a monarch known as the emperor. Much of Japan's early history would be shaped and influenced by cultures from the Asian mainland, with Buddhism being introduced to the region in the year 552 from Korea and later in 645. A series of reforms known as the Taiko reforms being implemented to remodel the political landscape of the country and mirror the Chinese system based around an imperial court. This court initially did not have a permanent home and was moved to a different location with each passing emperor until 794, when Emperor Kmu decided to fix the capital in one place, modern-day Kyoto, thereby initiating the beginning of the Heian period, which was to last for almost 400 years. Over time, however, the imperial court became grandiose and too focused on internal politics, neglecting proper governance of the country outside of the capital and greatly weakening its own authority. As a consequence, the land that was formerly under the control of the emperor began to gradually slip into the hands of local noble elites, which led to the emergence of a feudal system, where power was decentralized and not centered on the imperial court in Kyoto. This decline in the central authority of the state led to powerful regional warrior clans like the Taira and Minamoto growing in strength, backed by the military might of their samurai warriors. They were ultimately able to challenge the dominance of the emperor during the Hagen Rebellion of 1160, which was sparked by disagreement over who should inherit the imperial throne. This in turn escalated into the Genpei War of 1180 to 1185, with the Minamoto clan, headed by its faction leader Yoritomo, eventually winning out over their rivals and subsequently establishing a new and separate military government based in the city of Kamakura, far away from the imperial court of the emperor in Kyoto. Yoritomo was able to go further and convince the Emperor Go-Toba to grant him the title of shogun, or great general, in 1192, effectively making him the de facto ruler of all Japan and initiating a period of military rule called the shogunate, which was to last for the next 700 years. The fighting abilities of the samurai would soon be put to the test once again at the beginning of the 13th century, when one of the largest empires in history turned its attention towards conquering Japan. In 1265, the Mongol Empire, headed by Kublai Khan, demanded that Japan submit to him as a vassal state, but after receiving no response, the Mongol leader began to plan a full-scale invasion of the country. The Mongol forces landed on the island of Kyushu in 1274 and met a determined, although significantly smaller, force of samurai in battle. Despite being severely outnumbered, the tide turned in favor of the Japanese defenders when a powerful typhoon, called the Kamikaze, or Divine Wind, suddenly swept through the region and destroyed practically all of the Mongol fleet. The Mongols attempted a second invasion in 1281, but remarkably faced the exact same outcome as what had befallen their predecessors some 7 years earlier, with their forces being wiped out by yet another typhoon. Although they had successfully seen off the threat of invasion, Japan's defensive efforts had nevertheless almost bankrupted the treasury of the shogunate, and consequently, many of the samurai were not paid for their services. This greatly soured relations between the military government and the samurai clans, and so in 1333, Emperor Go-Daigo launched a coup with the aim of restoring power to reside with him as emperor and the imperial court in Kyoto. Despite being successful in this endeavor, this state of affairs did not last long. For just 5 years later, in 1338, Go-Daigo himself was overthrown in another coup, which restored the power of the shogun under the new leadership of Ashikaga Takauji. Even though the shogun's authority had been restored, actual power within Japan was retained amongst the regional samurai clans, whose feudal lords, called daimyo, directly controlled the land for themselves. These clans would often forge alliances and plot against one another to alter the balance of power within the country, as they saw fit, which more often than not resulted in open civil war. The most violent of these conflicts broke out in 1467, with the Unin War being fought to decide who would succeed the ruling shogun, Ashikaga Yoshimasa. The daimyo took sides in the conflict and effectively caused the feudal system to collapse, carving up the country for themselves into a patchwork of smaller, independent states. This chaotic time, known to history as the Warring States or Sengoku period, continued well into the 16th century and saw many significant military developments, such as the emergence of ninjas, who carried out covert assassinations and espionage missions, as well as the deployment of Buddhist warrior monks called Sohei on the battlefields. Although a paradigm shift in the fighting occurred in 1543, when a Portuguese trading ship was blown off course onto the island of Tanegashima, just south of Kyushu. The 3 Portuguese traders on board were the first Europeans to set foot in Japan and quickly established mercantile relations as part of the wider Portuguese trading network, which covered much of the Indo-Pacific region. Once a year, the Black Ship, as the Japanese refer to the Portuguese vessel, arrived off the coast to buy and sell merchandise, chief amongst